Hello, our viewers. Welcome to the show today. It's a kind of special show, and I would like to begin by thanking UMD Media for making the platform available. I will have a conversation with Professor Ezekiel Gabisa, who doesn't need any introduction, but a prominent scholar, particularly on issues that are concerning Oromia and Oromo politics. Today we will be discussing in details about the war on Oromia that started, for many of us, started last week, but we would be having a conversation and providing a very good background to this war because it didn't start last week. And I will be asking Professor Ezekiel Gabisa a couple of questions on his article that was published on Addis Standard last week. If you have not seen it, it's an op-ed, The Boomerang Effect, How Political Betrayal Transformed Oromo Youth Protest to Armed Resistance. Professor Ezekiel and I will be discussing what led to today's war in Oromia and what has happened since 2018 following the ascent of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to his current position. Professor Ezekiel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's nice to be with you. Likewise, nobody needs introducing Tsedale, Lemma, and it's an honor for me to be with you. And of course, paying tribute to the coverage that Addis Standard had done, and as long as you were the editor of Addis Standard. So it's an honor to be with you.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank UMD Media again for making the platform available for us. I have to really emphasize on that. Professor Ezekiel, we cannot start discussing about this war starting from last week. We cannot also do justice to the knowledge of the source of this war if we forget what has happened in post-2018 ascent of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed following years of Oromo protest that brought him to power. So we're gonna have to do some background information with regard to who is really at war with whom today. The government, the federal government, led by the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, and the Oromia regional state government, led by President Shimelis Abdissa, are the ones that are on the government side of this war. On the other side is the Oromo Liberation Army. The Oromo Liberation Army is an army that broke apart from the Oromo Liberation Front, a political front currently led by Dawood Ibsa and is registered by the Ethiopian Electoral Board as a political party to function and operate in the country. This did not happen again last week. It came about after a sort of peace agreement was signed between the Ethiopian government and the Oromo Liberation Front in Asmara in August of 2018, which led to the coming into home of the Oromo Liberation Front in September of the same year, September 2018. There were a cascade of events that followed, of course, the coming into home. And here's where we will be starting our conversation. And I would like to begin by asking Professor Ezekiel Gabisa to walk us back to what has happened when the OLF leadership came to Addis Ababa in the mid of September 2018 and what transpired. And we would like to discover whether that event was the beginning of the failure in terms of the political accommodation that the OLF as a party has received. So, Professor Ezekiel, walk us back to how it happened when Dawood Ibsa came to Ethiopia mid of September 2018. As I said, that was followed by a peace agreement, which we will be talking later on, that was signed in Asmara. So if you can please begin by walking us back to how OMF came to the Ethiopian political scene in September 2018.
I think for purposes of context, it's important to go even further back into the experience of the OLF, which is the parent organization of the OLA, its experiences with Ethiopian government. The OLA or the OLF, they have learned a bitter lesson about the intentions of the Ethiopian government. They don't always negotiate in good faith with insurgents. So they've been really skeptical about this. So it took a while for the Ethiopian government to frontally discuss the matter of returning the OLF returning to Ethiopia, and not only returning to Ethiopia but also to peaceful politics. Remember at that time in September, 15, I think 2018, it took a while. The OLF was probably the last of the political organization, the exiled political organizations to return to Ethiopia, because they had this history of negotiating with the Ethiopian government. They were very skeptical, so they demanded that the Ethiopian government sit down with them and hammer out an agreement that would govern the relationship of the OLF with the Ethiopian government. This bitter experience that makes them skeptical at least goes back to 1991, when the Oromo Liberation Front and the Oromo Liberation Army were together. They contributed significantly to the downfall of the Derg dictatorship. But once the Derg dictatorship fell and the TPLF took over the reins of power in Ethiopia, the OLA combatants were rounded up and herded into military camps through an agreement, by the way, an agreement brokered by diplomats in Ethiopia, 5 diplomats, and they were rounded up in the military camps, and they were annihilated mercilessly in Itesa and other military camps. That's an experience, a bitter experience that makes the OLA and the OLF really skeptical, even cynical about the intentions of the government. So they demanded an agreement before they returned to Ethiopia. That way, the Ethiopian government sent the then president of the Oromia regional government, and I think then the foreign minister of Ethiopia, as emissaries of the OPDO to Asmara. Now, it's also to be remembered that after the 1991 agreement, the OLF was not only OL was annihilated, but the OLF was also banished from Ethiopia, even from the neighboring countries, from Kenya, from other places. So they had to go to Asmara. That is important to also keep in mind, that the OLF went to Asmara because the EPRDF government would dislodge them from any other place in the Horn of Africa. And inside the country, Oromos, members and supporters of the OLF, were persecuted, and the reconstituted OLA resumed armed struggle in Ethiopia, even as EPRDF was in power. So the OLF in September, I think in August or July 2018, they negotiated an agreement with the Ethiopian government to disarm, to demobilize, and reintegrate. And that is the United Nations Peacekeeping Office of Peacekeeping Operations. It's a standard in post-conflict societies that would be implemented, and that was written into the agreement, that the OLA combatants would now be not only disarmed or demobilized, but also reintegrated. That's the key part, that they had to be reintegrated. But the government basically failed to reintegrate them. Some of the initial steps at reintegrating the about 1,300 OLA combatants that came from Asmara were sent to a camp in Ardaita, and the way they were treated signaled that the Ethiopian government was not going to keep its side of the agreement to reintegrate the combatants into this society. Now, initially, the OLA combatants were left to fend for themselves. If peace is needed, if peace is a requirement for anything that would happen in Ethiopia, political restructuring, economic growth, and resuming peaceful politics, it was important that former combatants were reintegrated into society based on their choice. That is to say, those who you choose would become part of the security system within Oromia, and others, if they choose, they will go to school, they will join society as based on their own choice. That didn't happen. That they were left to fend for themselves. Imagine you were a combatant for many years, and you're not really integrated. The only thing that you know is shooting. It's picking up arms. So that was the context, that they were left to fend about themselves. Keep in mind that
Can I interrupt you very briefly here? You've said that the peace argument that was signed in Asmara in the presence of former Oromia regional state government Lemma and the then foreign minister Workana Gabayo, who's currently the executive director, I believe, of IGAD. Was there something that we needed to see at that time, that there was something absolutely out of format, even from the very composition of the delegation sent by the Ethiopian state, the president of Oromia regional state? Was it supposed to be an agreement between the state and an armed group that was at war with that state, based in Asmara? Was it from the very beginning meant to be an informal agreement, which has probably led to the failure of concretizing the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of the armed group, the armed parts of the Oromo Liberation Army? How much of it can be attributed to, how much of this kind of informal approach can be attributed to this failure?
I guess from really what I heard from the horse's mouth, so to speak, on both sides, that there was sort of an 8-point agreement, and that's why I refer to it as an agreement, because it was not a signed agreement, but it had several elements. Was it necessary that they reach an agreement? Because the OLF has this experience, terrible experience with the Ethiopian government. They wanted it to be on paper and signed, so that this governs their relationship in the future. Not only for the two to know the bounds of what they are supposed to expected to do or supposed to do, what they could do and what they cannot. Not only that, but to the international community, so that the international community and the Ethiopian people actually understand what the agreement is all about. That was not done. Mr. Lemma Magarsa, when the OLF leader demanded that they sign, he said, look, we're all brothers. We brought this change together. We work from inside, you work from outside, but we are comrades in arms. And it is incumbent upon both of us to sustain peace for the future of the country and for the future of the Oromo people, and for responding to the demands of the Cairo that actually made the change possible. But they didn't do that. So it was a clear signal of the intention to not put anything on paper, because on the part of the PP government, these are the OPDO, they've always been competitors since 1991 in Ethiopian politics. They've never talked to each other. They had a bad experience at the very beginning. So they did not want to put anything in power. So that should have signaled to the OLF, and the OLF leader actually spoke about it every now and then, that they did not sign it. So that, what I'm saying is, that's the sin of omission that the PP, now PP at the time, or OPDO government, or the Ethiopian government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed did, because they knew what they were going to do. That is to say that they were going to, at least Abiy knew that he's going to change the agenda of reform to his own liking. Second, his own view and his organization's view is that the OPDO's line and the OLF line, political line, are irreconcilable. One has to defeat the other. So they were not going to accommodate the OLF's demands. They were not going to have the OLF compete in elections within Ethiopia. So they knew that, so they did not sign it. Now, it's not only leaving them, the OLA and the OLF to fend for themselves, but the Ethiopian government also unleashed its security apparatus, and its fury against the OLA right away. And that was the sin of commission. And thirdly, the incumbent that came to power through the struggle and sacrifice of the Oromo Kelo, the gallant Oromo youth, once in power, it turned against the genuine demands of the Kero, of demands for freedom, democracy, justice, and dignity, and changed that into a program of restoration of past chauvinism and autocratic rule and blatant injustice and the active denigration of the Oromo. So once they came into power,
we're going to get to that point, Professor, because I would really like to get to the bottom of what really led to this one. It's worth mentioning that the coming home of the OLF as a political party was already shrouded in violence. We can mention, for example, the violence that was unleashed on minority groups that were living in and around the Burayu. Shortly after the OLF came home, and the overwhelming narrative or overwhelming report by the state media at that time was that even before the party established itself back home, even before they really find their way around, the armed group of the Oromo Liberation Army was already accused of conducting that atrocities in Burayu. That was already back in September, in first week of September, or in second week, as soon as they came home of 2018. So how much of this is emblematic of what you are discussing now? You know, was their integration into the political scene, the Ethiopian political scene, was already meant to take off on the wrong foot? Politically speaking, how much of this can we attribute in hindsight today when we look at it?
Yeah, this is what I was talking about, is really pre-September 15, 2018, when the OLF came, before the large throng of Oromo supporters of the OLF welcomed them in Addis Ababa. This is even before that. It was clear. What I'm saying is that even before that event, that spooked, in my view, the OPDO power structure, before that, the intention was clear. That's basically what I am saying. Once they came on the 15th, a cascade of events that you just said started to happen. The first is, before the 15th of September, when the OLA came, and that the Oromo people, basically from all corners of Oromia, converged on the Mescal Square, and that was basically almost unseen. The multitude of Oromos that came sent a clear signal, maybe the spines of the OLF, that this is untenable, that the OPDO might not be able to contest this election. So they start to take steps. But what I was thinking was that the intention was clear. Even before this happened, the OPDO government at the time, the OPDO-led government, was waylaying them. But once they came, remember, two organizations that were in Asmara returned to Ethiopia, to the point that you're saying. That is Gimbot 7, which was an armed group that was in Asmara. They came a week before September 15, and I was there. I was in that country in Addis Ababa at that time, in Finfinne. The entire city was festooned by the flag of Ethiopia that does not have this star in the middle. So a week later, when the OLA came, supporters of the OLF, not the OLA, OLF tried to say, well, if you have done your part, you've enjoyed the welcome on the week before, and now we'll put the OLF sign to celebrate the homecoming of the OLF, and that led to a clash in Gulale. And of course, that night, after that clash, that night, the stream of people that was coming from the West Oromia and Southern Oromia, they were stopped, and the number of buses, from what the people say, went extended from Burayu all the way to outside Gafarsa. They were stopped. It was the Ethiopian military that opened the gate in Gulale and let them in. But that night, the night that people were returning home, some people, minorities, the Gamo, the Walaita, in Burayu were killed. And that was immediately blamed on Oromo youth, on the Kero. That night, even before the homecoming celebration in Mescal Square, that the program, the intention for which I was just talking about, was already in place. It was already underway. The criminalizing of the Oromo youth, the Kero youth, had started that night. Blame it. People died. Who killed them? Nobody knows. Who killed them? The OLA, when they were accused, said that investigations are in order. That never happened, but the intention started to play out. After that, there is also a series of events that I could speak to, but you can also help me to speak about that so that we can have a conversation. But that was the beginning. That was the beginning of the intention putting into effect. The OP.
I can add this conversation in between. I do remember at that time when we were dispatching journalists to Burayu area to go and as the news started to trickle of that really tragic atrocity in that area. It's not far from the capital, Addis Ababa, and I remember dispatching journalists to go and see what exactly is happening, because the news came all of a sudden. It was between one night to the next morning. So everybody was caught on a shocking surprise, and we sent journalists to go there, and the entire area was sealed off. Journalists could not access it. I'm mentioning this one because this was then become a trend of denying access to journalists to areas of violence since then, and probably we can make the connections in there. So journalists could not access this area to report what was happening, and the few people that were able to come to the center of the city, Addis Ababa, and were able to give access to journalists in their camps to spoke about them notifying local authorities in the area, police, militia, about that attack that was underway in those areas, and that was targeting the minority groups in Burayu area. And there was no action that was coming from the local authorities, the local militia, police, and entire security apparatus. Witnesses spoke of that. So it was something that was late to happen overnight, but very devastating atrocity that happened in just one night. So I remember reporting about it and sending journalists to that. This event is going to lead to the similar kind of event that has happened. And in my trajectory here, this is the other main trajectory when it comes to this rocky relationship between the OLF and the government there, is what happened at the end of September in Kamashi zone of the Benishangul Gumuz regional state, with the killing of four senior officials from Kamashi, but the killing happened in West Walega zone of Gimbi area. And 4 senior officials were killed. And that this happened around September 28th, if my recollection serves me good. And what happened after that was an announcement from the government that the assassination of these four senior officials happened by the Oromo Liberation Front armored group. The OLA was not at that time identified as the OLA, so it was the OLF armored group. And the statement that came 2 days later after that from Dawood Ibsa's office is a request for an independent investigation. They have distanced themselves from the assassination, but this event was one of the major trajectories that really hindered any possibilities of a peaceful resolution between the government and the Oromo Liberation Front at that time, because it didn't end there at the killing of the four officials. It continued, the violence continued, it became much more militarized. And in fact, the government announced the deployment for the first time after Prime Minister came, the first deployment of federal forces as per request. I think the first one was in Somali region, as per request by the regional authorities, happened in Western Oromia. Since then, Western Oromia is under the command post. So this event, in your understanding, did it prevent for the peaceful integration of the OLF into the politics? Continued discussion between the government? What I just said is event as they happened, as we were reporting them. But your reading of it would be much more needed here. Do you think it contributed to further, adrift the two parties from having any meaningful conversation in terms of reintegrating the OLF back into the politics?
I think it served as a casus belli for the government to implement its own intention, its own program of continuing to marginalize the OLA. It was an event that was, on the media side, you can speak about it, but it was used as the reason for attacking the OLA. Who staged it? We will never know. As you just said, the OLF was demanding independent investigation. But by the way, for every killing that had happened under this prime minister's tenure, there is no investigation. OLF has been accused of many things, even under EPRDF. They have always demanded an independent investigation. It never happened. So it was actually, for me, the casus belli that the government was looking for. There was an agreement that's important to underscore. That agreement was never implemented because the government was hell-bent from the very beginning on destroying the OLF as a political force. Immediately after the OLF returned home, the government set loose its political cadres, the OLF-affiliated, the OPDO-affiliated Oromo sycophants, and staged a virulent campaign of vilification and humiliation of the OLF. Incitement, incrimination, and violence became the order of the day. To defame, to define the OLF as a violent, defame it, and then destroy it. So it was a plan that was unfolding out as far as my reading is concerned. And the event of the killing of four Benishangul Gumuz officials was trumpeted. It was seized upon to define, to defame, and then destroy. So it was really a casus belli. It was a reason for attacking. It's in the issue of disarmament, of orchestrated campaign of scapegoating and declaring war and command post. It was not something that was forced on the government. It is a choice of the government to destroy the OLF as a political force. We can talk about the other cascading events where the government and the OLF tried to implement the agreement, the DDR agreement, with the help of the Office of Peacekeeping Operations of the United Nations, which never happened. At every step, and maybe if necessary we can go through it, at every step though, the government was the non-committal part to implement the agreement. And I can go through them if we have the time, but for now,
that process started by an initiative led by Bagaras and the Bagara Council and Jawar Mohammed and Bakara Garba. We'll get to that in a bit. It happened in 2019, but 2018 entirely was events that were filled with lots of confusion. And one of the other trajectory that I like to bring here, as somebody who has been reporting on it, was in October of 2018, when this militarized violence, started showing no sign of dying off. Dawood Ibsar spoke to the government media and create that this one, which was the way it was portrayed in the media. He wanted to shed light on this failure of what you are calling now the DDR, this disarmament and demobilize and reintegration of OLF's forces into the Ethiopian army or the Oromia regional state forces there. He spoke of that failure in October of 2018 to the state media, in which he tried to elaborate that there was no agreement reached for the government to disarm the OLF, but an agreement that was have reached to work together towards ensuring peace in the region. I quote here, he said, contrary to popular belief, we have actually not reached an agreement with the government to disarm the OLF, but we have agreed that we work together to ensure peace reigns in the region. Maybe you can shed light on this, because this is also another misunderstanding that led to that popular vilification of the OLF as a party that was welcomed home, but also really bite the hand that fed it off. Maybe we can put some context in this one, Professor, if you elaborate what Dawood Ibsar meant by this interview to the government media at that time.
I think that's really important as well, because they seized on what he said, misrepresented it, and then used it, as I said, as a reason for attacking the OLF politically and then, of course, militarily. What I know is that the Oromo Liberation Front returned to Ethiopia to participate in peaceful struggle in the supposedly enlarged political space. And they were serious about that. Look, after 30 or more years, 30 or about 40 years of armed struggle, the OLF, like everybody else in Ethiopia, hoped that the moment of the arrival of the OPDO at the helm of power would be the beginning of an honest and genuine democratization of Ethiopian politics. They really wanted that. They were tired of combat. They did not want an armed struggle. They shared the hope and the euphoria so many people had at the time that this would be the beginning of the transition to democracy. The OLF had no fear of democracy. The Oromo organizations, even today, they have no fear of democracy. So at the time, the OLF was not afraid of democracy and democratization. They wanted to assist. There was an agreement between the Ethiopian government, the two emissaries that went to Asmara, and the OLF. And that peace agreement provided for the termination of hostilities. That's important too. The termination of hostilities, because this is the Abiy government was an EPRDF government. It's not a new government. It was the EPRDF government. And the OLF and the EPRDF were in armed struggle. So the agreement stipulated this will provide for the termination of hostilities. That is to say, the EPRDF, the second iteration, let's say it that way, and the OLF are not going to consider each other as enemies anymore. That it provided for the termination of hostilities, but it also provided for the desecuritization of Ethiopian politics. It was part of that agreement. It also included investigation of past injustices that were committed by the EPRDF government, and before the constitution was ratified in 1995, the 3 years that the TPLF led the government, and TPLF army actually was the Ethiopian army. In that period, prominent OLF members, Na'iga Mada, Gutama Hawas, they disappeared. And there was an agreement that this investigation would be held, that there will be an investigation into past injustices. And there was also part of the agreement was the peaceful political contestation. That much they agreed. So the agreement really stipulated for the establishment of one more thing on this one, a joint OLF Ethiopian government committee to implement the entire agreement, and particularly the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of the Oromo Liberation Army into civilian life. That was part of it. This is what was not done. And this is really where the issue that we just talked about, the issue of bad faith agreement came in. But there was an agreement that Dawood Ibsa was talking about, that we came in to implement the agreement, but the government is not implementing it, it's even portraying the issue. That's what he said at the time. Portraying the issue in which the OLF is going to surrender to the Ethiopian government. The difference between the two is that the OLF's position was that they fought against the EPRDF dictatorship from outside. Those who came to power, they fought it from inside. So the victory and the opening of peaceful contestation of politics would begin because of the joint contribution that they made. That's not what the agenda of the OPDO was. So they always entered that particular agreement in bad faith, and any other agreement that they reached in bad faith afterwards. And there is, by the way, it's not only 2019, it already started in 2018 but I'll save myself for that one, but that's the question that you asked me about the bad faith and what Dawood Ibsa was saying at that time.
I remember when this confusion surfaced, and there was a lot of reporting about the government intentionally allowing the OLF to come back and its fighters to join without any training and reintegration and reorientation courses. The media is awash with this kind of reporting, misleading reporting. What has happened was, as you've said, the 1,000 or so OLF fighters that came from Asmara, disarmed, were admitted to Agarfa in RC on the way to Bali, not far from where we are. So in Agarfa, and they were admitted there, but the reintegration process there did not go well as expected. OLF was already complaining about losing access to the camp where its forces were encamped and were undergoing through the training. The 1,000 or so ones that were late to come in via Tigray, they were welcomed in Tigray as well, and they were then ushered in to Agarfa Training Center to take reintegration courses there. It never materialized, and what happened to them, we don't know. How they were dispersed after that, there is not much of public knowledge about that. So, in October of 2018, Jawar Mohammed wrote, pleading with the government to make this agreement that they have signed with the OLF public. It went unheeded, as many of the pleas from other civic organizations as well that were asking, make the agreement clear and have a third party negotiate the remaining in good faith. This was also not implemented to my knowledge. And the second attempt, or maybe more, happened when 71 individuals and Oromo civic organizations and Bageda council members and Ezekiel council took to the traditional way of resolving the conflict between OLF and the government, and having a clarity of what to do with the OLF fighters and how to reintegrate and how to get back. And that has resulted, after many months of failed attempts, I'm saying failed because there were some visible signs of sabotage from the government side. We were reporting what some of the officials were saying. For example, in the midst of the negotiation, an interview that was given, for example, to ISAT television, if I remember it, by one of the highest member of the government official today, Ala Musine, was besmirching the Oromo Liberation Front fighters. At the same time, when conversation was happening, peace negotiation was attempts to reach at this peace agreement were being made by the 71 officials and Bagada Council and Jawar and Bakala Garba and all these things. Be that as it may, this attempt has led to the January 2019 breakthrough of a peace agreement brokered by these 71 civic organizations and individuals to reach at a ceasefire at that time. And here is the other trajectory that happened where we talk about where did things go wrong. After this ceasefire was signed, there was another attempt of demobilizing the remaining forces of the Oromo Liberation Front. This was done, in fact, really single-handedly spearheaded by Jawar and Bakala Garba, who even traveled to areas in West Oromia to persuade the fighters that were still out there to surrender their guns and join disarmament and reintegration programs that was happening in Tonlai camp. And they were able to persuade around 1,000 fighters at that time to come and join the camp in Tonlai. But things did not go well. You are probably the right person to take us through that. What happened in Tonlai camp, Professor Ezekiel, and how did things go wrong after that?
You know, I will ask you a question about coverage, because when the 1,300 Oromo Liberation Army combatants traveled into Ethiopia through Tigray, that minute, because they were met in Mekelle by Sibat Naga, there were some pictures, and that minute, the media turned on this chicanery that says that the OLF is already with the TPLF. The campaign of vilification started in the media, and I'll get back to that and ask you about how did this go wrong. But because it is important to go through the steps that led to the present moment, you know, the whole started up after the negotiations. The whole thing started, and the OLA fighters, combatants that had already returned to Ethiopia prior to the change of government and the ascent of Mr. Abiy to power, they were already in Western Oromia and in Southern Oromia. They were there already. There were fighters who needed to be integrated. Not only the 1,300 trainees that came from Asmara. So there was some rumors of problems and a potential outbreak of violence. The Oromia regional government, headed by Lemma at the time, sent a group of elders to Western Oromia in the summer of 2018 to meet with the OLA that remained, not the one that came from Asmara, to discuss the outstanding issues and find ways to implement the Asmara agreement. Before the elders got to the OLA camp and speak to them about good faith implementation, the head of the Oromia government, named Admasu Damto at that time, the spokesperson, went on TV and said that the OLA captured the emissaries. So you can see it right there. The Oromia government sent emissaries, and before they even got there, the Oromia government spokesperson goes on TV and says that they were attacked, and then they sent a helicopter to evacuate more than half of the 21 delegation. So that is a signal that the Oromia government itself, much less the federal government, was not really serious about making peace with the OLA at the time. Second, despite the obstacle that the Oromia government created, some elders actually made it to the OLA area in western Oromia, and they met with OLA commanders. Upon their return, and this is important, and I can present the plan that they presented, that they presented an 8-point plan to prevent the outbreak of full-scale conflict. That plan that was proposed by the partial members of the elders, it stipulated, among other things, that the proposed training and incorporation of OLA soldiers into the Oromia police or Oromia regional government, special forces, or any other thing in the government, or go back to school, or go back to some kind of civilian life. That's what part of it. I have a copy of it. I happen to have a copy of that 8-point plan. That was not implemented. Third, Jawar Mohammed and Bakkala Garba, they traveled to Western Oromia. They spoke to people, including some OLA on television. By the way, this was broadcast, and the copies could be found on OMN television, where they discussed issues to prevent an outbreak of a full-scale war between the Ethiopian National Defense Forces and the OLA. Upon their return, they also presented a 4-point plan to the Oromia government and the Ethiopian National Defense Force Supreme Command about integrating the OLA. They agreed. The ENDF and the Oromia government agreed to implement the 4-point plan Jawar Mohammed and Bakkala Garba presented, but instead of implementing the agreement, the ENDF actually sent military operations against the OLA in Western Oromia, including helicopter gunships. Fourth, this is the fourth one. The one that you spoke to is the fourth attempt to avoid violence. That was in January 2019. The Abagadas and the Hasikes, they met, not only the Abagadas and Hasikes, but business persons, intellectuals, other notables, and individuals launched a highly publicized reconciliation efforts between the two sides. Dawood Ibsa on that occasion came out and he said, we now transfer the OLA to the Abagadas and to Oromo people, and announce that they are going to dissociate themselves from the OLA that they had created and sustained up to that time. The 71-member technical committee was formed to implement the agreement to oversee the demobilization and reintegration of process, and they actually succeeded in bringing about 870 combatants into civilian life. But even then, the government gave them only a 20-day window, if you remember that. You will remember that. They said, you must do all of this in 20 days. Yeah. Okay, I couldn't hear you because you were muted, but they gave
There was
them...
a 20-day station, I remember. It was 20 days in the beginning, and then 10 days were added at the end of it. Yeah.
Correct. But look, disarmament, demobilization, reintegration cannot be done in 30 days. It simply shows you that that was the wrong signal on the part of the Ethiopian government. They do it 20 days or drop dead. So the fourth agreement, and there was a fifth agreement that was announced in the capital on May 29, 2019. Again, the OLF once again pronounced that it is no longer connected with the fighters, that any negotiation should be done with them. But look, the government since then, even though they publicly renounced and repeatedly agreed that they're going to return to peaceful politics, the work of the OPDO government or OPDO-led government was to reintegrate them. Always say, no, you have a secret negotiations. You cannot sit in the in the peaceful arena and then talk to the OLA. They always kept to try to reintegrate them. Always accuse the OLF itself for anything that was attributed to the OLA. So that is the bad faith that we were talking about. The 5 stages in which the chance to implement the agreement and inaugurate an era of peace was scuttled because of the government's premeditated decision and plan to defame. Look, there was a DDR, disarm, demobilize, and reintegrate. That was replaced by define, defame, and destroy. That is basically the DDR replaced by the DDD. But this is the accountability issue. You were in the country. You remember all of these things that I talked about. Even as they were coming from Asmara, they were being connected to the TPLF. And after that, there was really no good faith negotiations and agreements genuinely to implement the plan to achieve peace. What was the role of the media as that? How much of it is really the role of the media to tell the world what was happening, that we are now in another round of all-scale war in Oromia?
Oh, yeah, this is a boomerang on my side now. We will get to your article about it. Yeah, the role of the media. It's not something that I'm proud of saying this, but we cannot really shed off responsibility to where things are today. It is a lot easier to just find the Shane, oil like Shane, blame it on them. Somebody assassinated, it's oil like Shane. I tell you this, we were trying to find out how it is that the disarmed members of the OLF came about to receive that reception in Tigray state at that time, where some of the disarmed combatants were seen in a picture with Sabahat Naga and other TPLF officials. This was a phase where the center, the federal government, led media, and also the overwhelming number of the media were already painting, the failure of this transitional justice began by that defamation of the TPLF when they broke out from the APRD. Even before they broke out, there was already that defamation and vilification of the TPLF. And this is happening even after the Prime Minister has apologized in the name of EPRDF, the entire state, to the Ethiopian people. But because there was that failure of implementing transitional justice, one part was coming up as the reformer, the other part as a villain. So that media narrative was overwhelming. So the very visibility of the OLF fighters next to the TPLF founder, Sabahat Naga, was already a fodder to the media to feed into that frenzy that the two are already starting to work together to destabilize and to what do they call it, the reform, to what is the famous word that they use to abort the reform, or destabilize the reform and everything. So that narrative was already overwhelming. So it was starting from the wrong perception already through the media. Throughout that, what I can remember, what I can share with you is as my lived experience as a journalist, is that the militarized violence after that, the targeted assassinations after that, were automatically passing by as the oil like Shani, right? The banking, the robbing of the banking, 17 banks in one day, I guess. There was a lot of pressure that it is the oil doing that. Later on, I think you remember the interview that General Kamal Galchu gave to LTV media, in which he alluded to, actually, publicly, that these were orchestrated bank robbery, orchestrated by the OPDO itself. He has alluded that. He said this after he left his position as the head of the security of the Oromia regional state. So he has admitted to the involvement of the security, the government security, the regional government security there in this robbery. But there was no time for the media to pause and find the truth in that. So the truth was as much a victim as the agreement, the peace agreement that was signed in Asmara, if there was an agreement signed in Asmara in this regard. So you have to either really immediately say that this happened because the OLF fighters are robbing banks, assassinating individuals, higher level officials. So it wasn't given, it was a taken thing. I think it still is. You remember the recent assassination of the Karayu Bargeras, and the uniform and simultaneous report by almost all media functioning in that country that the assassination happened by the Shani rebels, the OLF Shani, as it is called now. So this is how the media has treated this entire period since 2018 and the relationship of the OLF with the government. There are even others that reported that the government has already integrated the OLF fighters into Oromia police. And so the police is OLF now, the Oromia police is OLF now. And this has actually prevented a possibility of resolving or having a serious peace negotiation between these two rival parties, rather, the OLF and the OPDO. And now the popular narrative is that the OPDO or even the Prosperity Party, the Oromo Prosperity Party, is the OLF, right? They're one and the same. Now it's even an accepted reality. Where did that come from? It's the media. It's a reality that's accepted. So this is how the media has treated it. Speaking of what Kamal Gulchu said, or the name himself, there is another trajectory here that I want us to explore in terms of what stood on the way that leading to the current war, which we will get to later on, is that it was the appointment of Kamal Gulchu as the head of the Oromia Regional State Peace and Security Office, or the Security Office. And it was also another signal that the attempt from the ruling party was, instead of institutionalizing a genuine peace talk and ceasefire or cessation of hostilities discussions, what was happening was divide and distribute rent, divide and distribute state rent, appoint them to a higher level offices, which was creating that further fracture, and further suspicion. I think if I can find this one, I can even mention it by date, where Daud or Daud Ibsa has publicly spoke against this and his suspicion because of this. And he gave a statement that he suspects now the government is not genuine enough. When the government announced it, the Oromia Regional State Government announced it, Kamal Gulchu, who was one faction of the OLF, as the head of the security. This has created further suspicion. And in the presence of suspicion, as you've said, no negotiation, no peace talk can succeed. And Daoud Ibsa did not hide of his displeasure at the assignment of Kamal Gulchu. So that was another consequential decision that was taken by the Oromia Regional State Government. So these are cascade of events that we could safely say paved the way for increased military confrontation between the ruling party, the ruling government, its army, and the regional government in Oromia Regional State. And this was then further compounded by, can we get to the point where Hachalu Hundessa was assassinated? I think this is going to lead us to your article now on how you narrated why the youth is joining the armed resistance today. Do you think that the breakthrough event for this is the failure of the peace negotiation or the assassination of Hachalu Hundessa? You are muted, Professor.
Is it me that muted it or somebody else? I don't know. But look, Hachalu's assassination is a turning point. It really shows the determination of this government to rein in any nationalistic fervor. Anyone with the ability, with a kind of gift that Hachalu has to mobilize, courageously speak with clarity and purpose. The silencing of Hachalu itself was a turning point. There is no doubt about that. But before we go there, let me go back to this thing about media and ask you this question, because you raised this critical point where Kamal Gulchu was Kamal Gulchu, who is known to have had some squabbles with Daoud Ibsa in Asmara, and almost bordering on mutual enmity, was appointed to oversee the OLA and their integration, that was, of course, greeted with great displeasure on the part of Dawood Ifsa. That's not alone, by the way. Even to this day, Ainu Gonfa, the same league as same cut from the same cloth as Kamal Galchu, in terms of their relationship with the Dawood Ifsa OLF, is still in the government. Abebe Garasu, Colonel Abebe Garasu, is the one that is speaking against the OLA at every single turn of events. Now, the Hachalu assassination is a turning point in the sense that the day that he was assassinated, minutes afterwards, the Ethiopian government and the government, the president of the government, the regional government of Oromia, already said he was killed by the OLA without any investigation. You would expect government officials to be careful, to always defer to the police for investigation. But even the prime minister, when Engineer Semenyo was killed, he was in the United States at the time. As soon as his name was mentioned that he was killed in Finfinne, the prime minister blamed somebody else, like the TPLF, without investigation. So robbing of banks, all of this are told in a different narrative. Was the media, you who were in the media, were you told to say it that way? It was insinuated, or are you out of fear or dereliction of duty of the media that you were not reporting what you knew to be, if not untrue, premature? That is to say, Achalo was killed by the OLA without any investigation. Why was the media not reporting on those kinds of issues? They're saying that this is premature to declare the OLA as the culprit.
Oh, that's a very difficult question. From my perspective, we have been very careful. I have to say that in my former role as the editor of Addis Standard, we have always been struggling to find and to establish facts. For example, I remember when the 17 university students, female university students, were kidnapped in Western Oromia. There was that overwhelming pressure, even as the government stuttered, to come up with a convincing statement. The regional government was in Oromia, in Amhara state, and the federal government were so incoherent on the account of exactly what took place. We were, first of all, you have to understand that whenever something happened, areas are quickly sealed off. Information is privileged. And the privileged information is coming through state-controlled media and pro-state controlled media, be they independent or party-owned or public-owned media. So the trend is that when something happened, the truth is hidden, and information, and it does not necessarily mean that information is the truth, is served on a basis of privilege. So you don't have access to it. This is further compounded by the immediate shutting down of communication in areas where this violence takes place. It was when these 17 students were kidnapped and disappeared from the face of the earth, genuinely disappeared from the face of the earth. There was not even a coherent statement coming from the government. So I remember the journalist that was assigned to cover for Addis Standard was pregnant at that time. I'm not sure if I'm at liberty to say her name now, but she was pregnant and she was expecting her baby. And she was running around the police, trying to call the regional government security forces, the federal police and everything. Every information that was coming was so incoherent that she had to stitch it together to make it a story, not because it was a fact, but because it was a cascade of events. Who said what? So you're compounded in reporting what government officials said about those events. But at the same time, the overwhelming reporting, more than 99% reporting, was blaming it on the OLF fighters, the kidnapping. Were blaming it, and including the government also was blaming it on the OLA fighters. We still don't know what happened. There is not an independent investigation conducted. We still don't know where those students are. They just disappeared out of the face of the earth, just like that. And no media so far has gone into, other than reflecting the pain and the agony of the family, what they were living through of losing their children. This was the reporting was really compounded into that. Talk to the family, talk to government officials, assemble this incoherent statement from the government officials, and make it a story. This is the trend. And you feel, I think you feel as a journalist, you feel pressured to also name. And it's also, in some instances, I think it's a willful collaboration. I would not rule that out on the side of the media to conclusively jump into saying this has happened because of that. We were investigating the presence of parallel forces dispatched by the government to hunt down the OLA, the Oromo Liberation Army fighters. These parallel forces sometimes include former combatants who have surrendered to the government and were rearmed again and sent in search of Jalmaro, the leader of the Oromo Liberation Army, and things going really bad because there is no accountability of this parallel army. I also put blame on the OLA side. We were trying to ask them to give us more about a certain individual's name, for example, which they mention in their statements from time to time about a platoon belonging to this parallel army that was sent to hunt them down. But this is not coming together, with all the limitations you have at the media. Investigating these kinds of explosive leads requires a very strong media with a very strong security, guarantee to the security of your journalists to go really beyond the headline of investigating and revealing the presence of parallel forces that were dispatched by the security forces to hunt down the OLA rebels. We also know of the presence of that. So the media is really cannot be excused of having a part in this failure of having a lasting solution with the OLF and the OLA and the government. I cannot say we are exempt of the blame. We are, in fact, a part of the problem in many instances. I can confidently say that, Professor. And I'm not proud of it.
Well, everybody knows the media environment today. I was actually talking about at that time when it seemed like we were at the stage of relaxation in this quest to transition to democracy. That was a time there was some sort of relaxation, the stage of relaxation before in the process of democratization. But today we all know what happened. But no, this discussion actually leads us to this round, the present round of violence that has been unleashed on the Oromia area. And that was what I was trying to write about, at least to underscore the extent of the campaign of the present war, that the government has decided to get into a perpetual war to resolve political problems, but also to highlight that the OLA that the government has relentlessly tried to depict as a monstrous agent of death, hell-bent on murdering and maiming and looting, is not what the government says. How difficult the media environment is, I understand, but from my perspective, the OLA today is not the OLA that was denied reintegration in 2018 and 2019, but it is the the Cairo that made the revolution itself, that brought the OPDO to power and this prime minister to power, are the target. And thirdly, I just wanted to underscore that this is an unwinnable war. War against OLA, as was the war against the TDF or the TPLF, it is going to be an unwinnable war. The Ethiopian military has never won any war against insurgents. Never. It's always come out on the losing side. And it's bound to fail again. But I just want to underscore that counterinsurgency strategy of draining the ocean in order to kill the fish, which an Oromia State's or an party official explicitly stated that this is going to be the strategy, that they will drain the ocean, which means the people, in order to capture or kill the fish, is not going to work because it's going to drive more and more people who find life unbearable. More and more young people who do not see any future are going to join the OLA, and they have joined in droves. So this, there should be some kind of a non-military solution to this, because it's going to be an unwinnable war. It will bring down a government, and this could be just another round of the tradition of state collapse in Ethiopia. But here, it's not really about the state collapse, but it's the possibility of the Rwandization of Ethiopia. So this what we're getting here is probably the failure of democratization. Do you think that the media is going to really do something about this to obviate the possibility of not only the failure or the Yugoslavianization of Ethiopia, but also the Rwandization of Ethiopia? Is it going to engage? What should be done from the part of the media to inform not only the public in Ethiopia, but also the international media, rights organizations, and the governments? Is there anything that the media can do?
Oh, there is quite a lot of things that the media can do. I think it has become a bit more difficult now. It is particularly after the designation by the parliament of the TPLF and OLA as a terrorist organizations. You would think independent journalists are under a lot of stress to even quote, to even report about these two parties without the fear, of repercussion following that. But there is a lot of things that the media can do in this regard, and one of the things is try to reach out, and understand, even if you have the already formulated idea of accusation or idea of already labeled the Oromo Liberation Army as the Burundian army that the Prime Minister often refers to, which we'll get back to. Even if you have that, you formulated that in your understanding, reach out to talk to, and what exactly is the Oromo Liberation Army standing for? What do they want? Why are they armed and still functioning, fighting, or in this armed resistance? And is there a possibility for the media to do that, to speak that side of it? Or is the media still really riding that narrative that whenever somebody sneezes somewhere, it is the oil live? There's also that failure of understanding or trying to understand about the multiple factors of the presence of horizontal armored groups, different armored groups, and distinguishing between what exactly is. You see, when I follow some of the media nowadays, some are even going to the level of saying there is a separate armored group that is not the OLA, but that is working for the OPDO or for the Prime Minister's party as a assassination group. This, killing ethnic minorities in Oromia and in Benishangul and all this. So there is this whole sorts of opinion formed there, which are not backed up by facts. And media's work is to back up that with facts. And how do you do that if you're not trying to reach out? When a statement is released from the OLA, for example, as a statement, the media is not privy to using that statement. Independent media cannot, without the fear, use that statement or pick up the phone to call. What exactly do you mean by that? You would do that as a journalist, right? You would pick up the call and ask if it is a government or a rebel group and everything. It shows you the withdrawal of the media from facing facts, whatever amount of fact that there is, and getting the other side of the story. So if we do not really have that level of reporting on both sides, you are then contributing to being instrumentalized of the politics. The ruling party happily instrumentalizes the information that it is giving to to the media with that privileged access, and they use and abuse of information. The instrumentalization of facts for political gain would become the reality of reporting on truth. So armed activities, armed resistance, as they were, are not an easy thing to report. It requires you to be there. The last time I think the AP journalists tried to talk to the rebels there, they ended up being jailed for 4 months, simply because they went and tried to interview rebel groups in Oromia. Right. So that tells you the difficulties of those willing journalists that are willing to shed light on the facts there. The others are willful collaborators of the government's narrative. There is no point where facts are scrutinized. So we should not really shy away from assuming the responsibility of this failure that led to the second civil war within a span of 1 year in Ethiopia. And I would even categorize the civil war in Oromia a civil war within a civil war, right? It is, we need to face it, that it is a war between two political groups that claim to represent the Oromo people. So I hope I answered your question when it comes to the failure of the media and what can be done. A lot can be done, but there has to be the courage and the willingness from the media to go for the facts and not for the government, concocted narratives. So I think if I have said that, we can move to have a brief conversation about your article, Professor Ezekiel.
Yeah, I think we've covered this issue of a plan unfolding on the part of the Ethiopian government. But the point right now is that this is an unwinnable war. And for listeners, Ethiopians or in the international media, in this article, which is part of the media to reach audiences beyond the Oromo and others, to reach in the international community, we're not making it up. We're not making it up at all when we say the Ethiopian government understands that this is a difficult war, but it's engaging in the campaign of vilification even today, after 4 years of attempt to eradicate and eliminate the OLA, they are still at it. And in this, we're not making it up. It is the Prime Minister himself saying it, and we're trying to make kind of attach meaning to what he's saying. So we will close this with 3 quotations that were in the article, in which first, the Prime Minister, in front of the House of Representatives on February the 22nd, was saying that the government is going to deal with the OLA, but describes, this is the defined strategy, describes the OLA as I wrote there, it says a rudderless and leaderless gang of bandits, which means define it as such, and then defame it and then attack it. So if it is possible to play
በየትኛውም ቦታ የሚደረግ ጥቃት የጋራ ጥቃት ስለሆነ በጋራ የምንከላከለው ይሆናል ለማለት ነው። ሸኔ ጋር ተያይዞ ተነሳው እውነት ነው። ሸኔ ግልጽ ዓላማ የሌለው ለምን ዓላማ እንደሚታገል የማያውቅ ለሰው ልጆች ክብር የሌለው የሰው ልጆችን በፓርቲ ደጋፊና ደጋፊ አይደለህም ብሎ የሚገል ጥቂት ገንዘብ ያላቸውን እያነቀ ብር አምጡ የሚል ከምን አይነት ሁኔታ እንደተፈጠረም ግራ የሚያጋባ ስብስብ ነው። እውነት ለመናገር ለምሳሌ ሌላውን ነገር ያድርግ ወንጪ ላይ የሚሰራውን የወንጪ አካባቢ አርሶ አደሮች በቱሪዝም ገንዘብ እንዲያገኙ የሚሰራውን ፕሮጀክት መኪና ማቃጠል ወይም ሰው መግደል ምንድነው ፋይዳው? ለኦሮሞ ሕዝብ የሚታገል ከሆነ እንዴት የኦሮሞ ልማት ያጠፋል? ዓላማው ግልጽ አይደለም። ዓላማ የለውም፣ የተጻፈ ነገር የለውም፣ ኃላፊ የለውም። አስቸጋሪ ስብስብ ነው። ግን የተከበረው ምክር ቤት ማወቅ ያለበት ባለፉት 8-9 ወራት የፌዴራል መንግስት የኦሮሚያ ክልል መንግስት ከዚህ እኩይ ስብስብ ጋር ለመዋጋት ከፍተኛ መስዋዕትነት ከፍሏል። አንደርማይን እንዳይደረግ ከፍተኛ ትግል ሲደረግ እንደነበረ መገንዘብ ጥሩ ነው።
Now, this is important because it's not true. What he said about the OLA is not true, and that is what we've been talking about. It is the government's action that drove many young Oromos into the mountains to pick up arms in self-defense. That is the first point, that it's not true. But what it shows here is when he says that, forget about the people that are being killed. When he says that it is about why is he destroying the project that is being constructed for the benefit of the Oromo people, it shows you and the rest of society and international community the callous indifference, the callousness with which he treats human life. That is the project, not the human life that is lost because they are considered Shane. But that's the point that define Shane as a monster that should be eliminated. But then he goes on to show that they were prepared. It was already specific in this case also that they were going to embark on another round of comprehensive campaign. And he talks about the preparation again on March 15 as he was speaking to the party leaders in attendance of the newly constituted Central Committee, where he talks about how Shane is really to be defamed. If you could play that for us as well.
ፕራይመርሊ የኦሮሞና የኦሮሚያ ጠላት ቢሆንም የሁሉ ብልጽግና ጠላት ነው። እያንዳንዱ ብልጽግና በጋራ ቆሞ የሚታገለው መሆን አለበት። ውስጥ እርስ በርሳችን የምንሻኮት የምንጠራጠር ሳይሆን ሊያፈርሰን የመጣ ጠላት መሆኑን አውቀን በጋራ መዋጋት አለብን። እኛ ስንዋጋው ህዝባችን አያጎሳቆልም። እኛ በጋራ ካልቆምንና ክፍተት ካገኘ ግን ይደረጃል። በጋራ ቆመን አንድ ሆነን ተናበን ተጋግዘን የምንዋጋው መሆን አለበት። ቲፒኤልኤፍም ሌላውም እንደዚሁ አንዳንዱን ጠላት ለአንዳንዱ ሸልሞ ለራስ ሌላ ጠላት መፈለግ አይቻልም። ምክንያቱም በእኔ በኩል የገባው ንፋስ ደመቀንም አደን መጉዳቱ አይቀርም። በሁሉም በኩል እንዳይገባ ጥንቃቄ ያስፈልጋል። ጠላቶቻችን የምንላቸው በሀገር አንድነት፣ በዲሞክራሲ ስርዓታችን፣ በህዝቦች አንድነት፣ ወንድማማችነት ላይ ጥፋት የሚያስከትሉ ጋሬጣ የሚያመጡ የኢትዮጵያን በሰላም መጓዝ የማይፈልጉ ናቸው። ይሄ ደግሞ ለደመቀም ለአደንም ለአብይም ያው ነው።
Yeah, interesting. And like I said, we were not really making it up. We were trying to interpret what the Ethiopian Prime Minister is saying. What this shows, what we just said, what this shows is that revealing the plan that was in the works at that time, that it's not only the Oromia government that is going to have to deal with the OLA, it's got to be the entire apparatus of the Ethiopian government that should be mobilized, but not only the Ethiopian government, but also the regional governments, in which when the Oromia government and the federal government hit the Shani against the anvil, the rest are going to capture and then destroy them. So that is the defamation right. The destruction is that he also understands how difficult this is. That this is, the OLA is not what he says it is. it also has the support of the Oromo people. So this is again another round of a losing battle. That is what we want to underscore. And if the international community hears it and the Ethiopian government hears it, this is an unwinnable war, because even the Prime Minister himself knows that it is unwinnable, and that is already in display in another quotation in the text, but also he speaks to in video.
I think part of this is the misunderstanding of the nature of the war in the region, be it a deliberate or non-deliberate misunderstanding of the nature of the war itself. We are seeing this seismic change that was happening within the youth, the Oromo youth, particularly after the assassination of Hachalu Hundessa and the crackdown that followed, the crackdown on the media, on the youth associations, on the same network that the current government wrote to come to power, because they had access to that network. The arrest of people like Jawar and Bakala Gerba that really disenfranchised the youth. They have lost sort of like the nucleus of the resistance, of a place where they have been assembled for 3 or 5 years prior to that, during the protest. It was the dismantlement of this political group in the regional state that drove away the youth in droves to go and join the Ola. So I agree when you say that the Ola that was there in 2018, or the Oromo Liberation Front armed group, armed members in 2018 are no longer the Ola of today. What we see is the youth in Oromia now joining in droves, and you see them, when they're training and graduating, their armed members in there. And the misunderstanding of this crackdown and its impact on the youth to distress further the politics of the ruling party today has made the Oromo Liberation Army a popular force within the youth. And that is where I think the role of the international community, as you have mentioned now, comes into play. If we want to have a peaceful resolution of that, the kind of narrative the Prime Minister is propagating, not only the Prime Minister, but the media and everything, it doesn't help in having a peaceful resolution to this conflict now, because they will always be under the impression that they're fighting against a small group of bandits. Some armed group left and right that are hiding in the forests and in the mountains of Oromia, running away. I think at one point the Prime Minister was also even saying that we cannot also attack them using drones, for example, because they don't exist in such a force that is worthy of applying drone attacks in the rebel-controlled area. But at the same time, I think you mentioned it in your article as well, the Prime Minister contradicts himself, right? At one point, he speaks about trying to get into the Oromo population and understand why they are sheltering, why they are supporting the Oromo Liberation Army. So this contradictory approach and misunderstanding of the nature of the resistance and the nature of the armed movement in Oromia is the hindering factor. In your understanding, do you think this is really the major hindering factor, or is it no appetite for having a cessation of hostilities implemented on both sides?
In my view, there is what a concept called sunk cost. They have gone a long way along this path. They cannot see that they should change strategy. They can't. And that's the point that I want us to show at the end, that there is a contradiction in the approach. That is, the Prime Minister himself, in his own words, acknowledges that the OLA enjoys broad public support. If that's the case, why go against them unless you really want to kill the people that support them. That's the part that he admits that this is not a considered approach. It has been tried not by this prime minister, but by his predecessors. So it failed. That kind of counters insurgency strategy where the insurgents are actually supported by the people is not going to work. So why commit to it? And I wanted us to play that and can conclude with that idea of the irony, the paradox, the contradiction of the policy that they're following and the reality they are understanding. So that translation itself would end it. So they must find a different way of dealing with the OLA rather than simply the sunk cost approach of of not changing course when that is required. If there is that contradiction of understanding what the OLA is, but not devising a strategy that could deal with it. With that, we will end.
Not sure if they can find the clip where.
Yeah, I was actually trying to show that where the prime minister is saying that fighting and defeating Shane requires a thorough and frank discussion with the Oromo people and the security forces in order to conduct a political and military offensive in a coordinated manner. That he admits to the notion that a military solution is unattainable. He says success cannot be achieved through a military campaign alone. It behooves us to ask why the Oromo people support the armed group. If there are any deficiencies with us, we must correct them. Well, that's what I wanted to underscore. We have outlined the process that led to the present state of affairs. The prime minister understands that there is no military solution to a political difference, especially defeating militarily an insurgent group that is actually supported by the people. So it is time to rethink the approach. It is time to rethink the process. Live up to what you preach and then devise a different strategy. It's a political problem. It didn't work in the north. It didn't work with the Tigray Defense Forces. It's not going to work in a larger Oromia. So it's time to reconsider the approach of counterinsurgency and destroying, like defining, defaming, and destroying is not going to work. It's time to reassess. Is the point. So I turn it back to you. You started it to close it that way.
Well, I wanted to ask one more question on this one, and before I end it with a note to this, because you have proposed now that a different approach is upon us. We have discussed the repeated failures of the approaches in the past, and I wonder what would it take this time? What would it take to come up with a roadmap for a peaceful resolution of this conflict now? And who should be doing that? What should be the role of the international community in engaging directly, for example, with the OLA and coming up with a roadmap? Is it the Oromo elites, intellectuals, civic organizations on the ground, the Bagheera Council, or who should be coming with the roadmap that would bring in the two and rebuild the trust that was never there before, but meant to be built when all these attempts, the 5 attempts that you were mentioning earlier, were done? So who should be doing that now, in your opinion? Before you finish, before I let you go, I want to reflect on that.
Sure, I'll make it very short on that one. What does it take to make this happen? Look, it's not on the part of the Oromo people or the Oromo elite or the Oromo political leaders or even OLA leaders. The Oromo people are people of Naga. That is one of the things that defines what it means to be Oromo. The Ola comes from the tradition of Naga. That means peace and peacemaking. That is an Oromo tradition. It's embedded in what it means to be Oromo. They are fighting, and everyone else is fighting because of the brutality, the exclusion, the marginalization, the exploitation, and the degradation of the Oromo person, the criminalization of the Oromo person. That is what is leading to an armed conflict. Otherwise, the Oromo come from the people of Naga. So it rests upon the Ethiopian government to change course at this point in time. What would make the Ethiopian government act in a way that is appropriate to the demands of the time? Well, that's this debate between. It reminds me of the dialogue between Socrates and Thrasymachus, and when they were debating why good people should come to power. Why, if it's not to the benefit of the people who actually volunteers to come to public service. Thrasymachus is saying that it's the violence that you can do, and Socrates is saying no. If good people do not come to power, it's the penalty of their refusal that should force them into come to political power. So this government, what should bring them to the negotiating table, and a different approach, a non-military approach, ending the militarization and the commercialization of Ethiopian politics and saving the polity from total destruction, is the penalty of refusal. The penalty of refusal to address political issues in the political realm. It hasn't worked. If you keep in this course, there is a penalty. There is a penalty that befell Haile Selassie's government, Derg's government, and EPRDC government. It will collapse, and this time it will be a war of all against all. To avert this, to avert the penalty of the war of all against all, it is the Ethiopian government that should decide to change course.
All right, with that note, thank you very much for dedicating your time to get into the bottom of what exactly is besieging the Oromia regional state and the civil war that is less talked about and not known a lot, other than the media's coverage of the government's narrative. We try to cover what exactly gave way to today's war in Oromia, because as in many wars, it didn't start last week when the government announced it of a total elimination campaign against the Oromo Liberation Army operating in Oromia regional state. It has a root and it has a background to it, and reaching to that background and understanding what took place since 2018 is the key component of trying to solve this war in Oromia regional state that is threatening the country, but also making the lives of ordinary people unbearable, as in all wars do in this regard. So, Professor Ezekiel Gabisa, thank you very much for dedicating your time. I hope to be able to see more articles written by you to shed more light as we go by. And I would also like to deeply thank UND Media for allowing us this platform to discuss about this issue in depth. That's it from us. Good day.